11 drivers agreed to share what happened to them on those back roads. Some recorded their accounts on dashcams. Others wrote letters they never sent. A few whispered their confessions to dispatchers during frantic 911 calls. What they experienced out there in the dark, between mile markers that don't exist and towns that vanished decades ago, will make you understand why so many truckers refuse to drive through Oregon after sunset. If you're ready to hear what's really out there on the loneliest highways in America, then you're in the right place. Subscribe to Verified Fears, because once you hear these accounts, you'll never look at an empty road the same way again. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we're about to take you on 11 journeys into the darkness that waits between the white lines. Let's begin. He had been driving trucks for 30 years, and in that time, he had seen just about everything the road could throw at a man. Black ice that turned highways into skating rinks. Fog so thick you might as well be driving blind. Brake failures on mountain grades that made your stomach drop. He had handled all of it without breaking a sweat because he was a professional, and professionals did not panic. But what happened to him on Highway 26 3 months ago changed something fundamental in how he understood the world. The dashcam caught his voice that night, shaking in a way it had never shaken before. And the footage was later turned over to authorities who had no explanation for what it recorded. It was a Tuesday night, sometime around midnight, and he was hauling a load of lumber from the coast back toward Portland. Highway 26 through the Coast Range was a route he had driven hundreds of times. He knew every curve, every grade, every spot where deer liked to jump out. That night, the fog had rolled in thick from the Pacific, the kind that turned headlights into useless halos of diffused light. But he was not worried. He had driven through worse. The first thing he noticed was the silence. His radio had been playing classic rock, nothing fancy, just background noise to keep him company. Then it cut out. Not static, not a signal loss, just dead air. He figured it was the mountains interfering with the signal, so he reached over to switch to the CB radio. That was when he realized there was no static on the CB either. Complete silence. In 30 years, he had never heard a CB radio go completely dead. There was always something, always voices cutting through, even if it was just fragments of other drivers miles away, or the hiss and crackle of interference. But this was different. This was the absence of sound, like the radio had stopped trying to receive anything at all. He turned his attention back to the road, and that was when he saw it. At first, he thought it was just the fog playing tricks with his headlights, creating patterns in the mist that looked almost organic. But then he realized the patterns were not in the fog. They were on the road itself. The asphalt ahead of him seemed to be moving, not cracking or buckling like it does in an earthquake, but moving with a rhythm, expanding and contracting, rising and falling, breathing. He slowed the truck down, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. This could not be real. It had to be exhaustion, or maybe carbon monoxide leaking into the cab. But the longer he watched, the more undeniable it became. The road surface was pulsating like living tissue, like the chest of some massive creature drawing breath. Each rise and fall was slow and deliberate, maybe 6 or 7 seconds between cycles. The white lines that marked the lanes seemed to flex with the movement, bending and straightening in ways that paint on asphalt should never bend. He brought the truck to a complete stop at engine, idling, and sat there staring at what lay ahead. The breathing continued, perfectly rhythmic, perfectly calm. It was not aggressive. It was not threatening. It just was. And somehow that made it worse. If something was attacking him, he could react. He could fight or flee. But this was simply existing, indifferent to his presence, following its own alien logic. He grabbed his flashlight from the door panel and stepped out of the cab. The night air was cold and damp, smelling of pine and ocean salt. The fog pressed in around him, limiting his vision to maybe 20 feet in any direction. He walked slowly toward the front of his truck, keeping the beam of his flashlight trained on the road's surface. The asphalt continued its slow, steady breathing, up and down, up and down. He could not hear it, but he could see the shadows shifting with each rise and fall, could see small pieces of gravel rolling back and forth in response to the movement. He knelt down and reached out his hand, then stopped himself. Every instinct he had was screaming at him not to touch it. Instead, he watched the surface rise toward his outstretched fingers, then fall away. The movement created a subtle wind, a gentle exhalation that carried a smell he could not quite identify. Not decay exactly, but something organic and old and wrong. He stood up quickly and backed toward his truck. This was not something he could fix or understand or deal with. This was something he needed to get away from. But as he turned back toward the cab, he realized with a sinking dread that the road behind him was breathing too. The pavement under his boots was moving, rising and falling with that same steady rhythm. He was standing on it. He had been standing on it the whole time. His breath came faster now, and he scrambled back into the truck, slamming the door shut. He put the transmission in gear and pressed down on the accelerator, telling himself he would just drive across it, that it was still solid, still functional. The truck rolled forward onto the breathing section of highway, and he felt it immediately through the steering wheel. A pulsing sensation, like driving over speed bumps that appeared and disappeared in rhythm. The whole truck rocked gently with each breath of the road beneath him. He kept driving, eyes locked on the white lines ahead, trying to use them as a guide. But the lines were changing. They were moving independent of the breathing now, sliding across the asphalt like snakes. The dashed center line stretched and compressed, the segments growing longer and shorter. The solid white line marking the shoulder began to curl inward, creating spirals and loops that had not been there moments before. He was going 40 miles per hour, then 50, then 60, trying to outrun whatever this was. But it was not localizing. It was not ending. The entire highway ahead of him was alive, breathing and shifting and rearranging itself. The road curved where it had been straight. Hills appeared where the land had been flat. His GPS showed him traveling in a straight line west, but his eyes told him he was looping back on himself, circling through impossible geometry. The steering wheel began to feel different under his hands. Warmer, softer. He looked down and saw that the hard plastic was developing texture, growing almost organic to the touch. Tiny ridges formed across its surface, and he could swear he felt a pulse beneath his palms. He jerked his hands away, and the truck immediately began to drift, responding to the shifting road beneath it. He had no choice. He grabbed the wheel again, feeling that wrongness seep into his skin. His radio crackled back to life suddenly, but instead of music or voices, it produced a sound that matched the breathing of the road. A slow, rhythmic exhalation of static, perfectly timed with the rise and fall of the asphalt. The CB radio joined in a moment later, creating a stereo chorus of breathing that filled the cab. He reached out to turn them off, but the knobs would not move. They had become soft under his fingers, yielding like flesh. He did not know how long he drove through that impossible landscape. It could have been 10 minutes or 2 hours. Time felt elastic, stretching and compressing like the road itself. But eventually, without warning or transition, everything snapped back to normal. The road became solid and still. The white lines returned to their proper positions. His steering wheel was hard plastic again. Both radios went silent and then resumed their normal broadcasts mid-song, as if they had never stopped. He pulled over onto the shoulder as soon as he found a wide spot and sat there shaking, his whole body drenched in cold sweat. The highway behind him looked perfectly normal. The fog was lifting slightly, and in his mirrors he could see the regular, static, blessedly unchanging asphalt stretching back into the darkness. He checked his GPS. He was exactly where he should be, having covered the normal distance in the normal time. He drove straight home that night, abandoning his delivery schedule. He called in sick for a week. When he finally worked up the nerve to tell someone what had happened, they looked at him with concern and suggested he see a doctor. Get his medication checked. Take a break from the long hauls. Nobody believed him, because why would they? Roads do not breathe. Reality does not bend like that. But he went back to Highway 26 3 weeks later, in daylight this time, just to see. He parked in the same area where it had happened and walked along the shoulder for half a mile in both directions. The asphalt looked normal, cracked in places, patched in others, marked with the standard white and yellow lines. He knelt down and pressed his palm flat against it. Solid, cold, completely still. But just as he was standing up to leave, he felt it. Just once. Just for a second. The faintest suggestion of movement beneath his hand. A slow rise, a gentle fall, and then nothing. He pulled his hand back and stared at the road. It remained perfectly still. He waited for 5 minutes, watching, but it did not move again. He has not driven Highway 26 at night since then. He takes longer routes now, routes that add hours to his trips and cut into his profit margins. Other drivers ask him why, and he makes up excuses about wanting to see different scenery, about avoiding the fog. But the real reason sits in the back of his mind every time he looks at a map of Oregon. Some roads are more than pavement and painted lines. Some roads have their own rhythm, their own breath, their own unknowable purpose. And he wants no part of whatever breathes beneath Highway 26 when the fog rolls in and the world stops making sense. You check the doors 3 times before you pull out of the rest stop. Driver's side locked, passenger side locked, both back doors locked. It is a habit you developed after the divorce, this obsessive checking, this need to make sure nothing can get in uninvited. The truck rumbles to life beneath you, and you ease back onto Highway 138, heading east through the darkness toward Diamond Lake. The road is empty at this hour. Just you and the tall pines that press in from both sides, their shadows swallowing the moonlight. You are running. Not from anything specific, or maybe from everything at once. The house you cannot afford anymore. The lawyer's bills stacked on the kitchen counter. The voice of your ex-husband telling you that you were never good enough, never present enough, never enough. So you took this job, long-haul trucking, because the road does not ask questions, and the loneliness of the cab is somehow less suffocating than the loneliness of that empty house. The radio plays soft country music, and you let yourself zone out into the rhythm of the drive. The white lines tick past in your peripheral vision. Your hands rest easy on the wheel. Your mind drifts to mundane things like whether you remembered to pay the electric bill, whether your sister got your voicemail, whether you will ever feel like yourself again. That is when you notice the smell. It is subtle at first, just the faintest hint of cologne. Not yours. You do not wear cologne. You lean forward and sniff the air, wondering if maybe it is something from the rest stop, some stranger's scent that clung to your jacket. but it is getting stronger, filling the cab with a familiar sweetness that makes your stomach tighten with recognition. It is the cologne your father used to wear. The same brand, the same sharp citrus notes, mixed with something darker and woodsy. He has been dead for 7 years. You glance at the passenger seat and your hands jerk on the wheel hard enough to make the truck sway. There is someone sitting there. A woman, middle-aged, wearing clothes that look decades out of date. She's looking straight ahead through the windshield, her profile illuminated by the green glow of the dashboard lights. You know that face. You know that face because you have spent years trying to forget it. Doors were locked, you whisper, your voice cracking. The doors were locked. She turns to look at you, and when she speaks, her voice is exactly as you remember it, soft and sad and eternally disappointed. You never came to visit me, not once in the hospice. I called for you every day. It is your aunt, your mother's sister, the one who raised you for 3 years when your mother could not, the one who taught you to braid your hair and make pancakes and believe that someone could love you unconditionally, the one who died alone in a hospice while you were too busy with your own problems to make the 4-hour drive. You went to the funeral and you cried, but you never visited when it mattered, when she was still alive and calling your name. You are not real, you say, but your voice has no conviction in it. You can see her clearly now, every detail perfect. The mole on her left cheek, the way her hair curls at her temples, the gold wedding band she never took off even after her husband died. You are not real. I am tired. I am stressed. I am hallucinating. You were always good at making excuses, she says, and the disappointment in her voice cuts deeper than any knife. That is what your husband said, was it not? That you were always making excuses instead of being present? That you were always somewhere else in your head instead of with him? Your hands are shaking now, gripping the wheel so hard that your knuckles have gone white. How do you know that? How do you know what he said? She does not answer. Instead, her face begins to change. It is subtle at first, just a shifting of features, a blur of motion like an old photograph developing. The wrinkles smooth out. The gray hair darkens to brown. The features sharpen and harden, and suddenly you are looking at your ex-husband's face on your aunt's body. His expression cold and calculating in a way you remember too well. You were never enough, he says in his voice, the voice that used to keep you awake at night, picking apart your every failure in the darkness of your bedroom. Not smart enough, not pretty enough, not present enough. I wasted 10 years on you, and what did I get? A wife who was already gone before she left. You want to pull over. You want to stop the truck and get out and run into the trees and never look back. But your foot stays on the accelerator, your hands stay on the wheel, and the truck keeps rolling forward through the darkness because some part of you knows that stopping would be worse. That whatever this is, whatever is sitting in your passenger seat, it wants you to stop. It wants you alone and motionless in the dark. I tried, you say, and you hate how small your voice sounds. I tried to be what you needed. The face shifts again. Your ex-husband's features melt away like wax, reforming into someone new. This time, it is your mother, younger than you ever knew her, maybe 20 years old, with the same hollow eyes you inherited. You are just like me, she says, running away from everything, blaming everyone else. I ran too, you know. I ran from you. That is why your aunt had to take you. Because I could not stand to look at you and see my own failures reflected back. Stop it, you say, louder now, anger mixing with the fear. Stop it. You are not her. You are not any of them. No, the thing agrees. And now the face is shifting faster, cycling through people you know and people you have forgotten. Your first boyfriend who you ghosted after 2 dates because you were too afraid of intimacy. Your college roommate who you stopped talking to after graduation. Your sister who you keep meaning to call but never do. Every single person you have let down. Every relationship you have abandoned. Every connection you have severed out of fear or selfishness or simple neglect. The faces blur together, becoming a grotesque slideshow of your failures. And through it all, the voice keeps talking, reciting every cruel thing you have ever thought about yourself in the dark hours of the morning when sleep would not come. You are alone because you deserve to be alone. You push everyone away and then wonder why you are lonely. You take and never give back. You are your mother's daughter through and through. You will die alone just like your aunt did. And nobody will come to your bedside either because you never showed up for theirs. The highway has become endless, a black ribbon stretching into forever. And you realize with mounting dread that you have not seen a mile marker in ages. You have not seen another car. You have not seen anything except trees and darkness and the thing in your passenger seat that will not stop showing you your own face now. Your own features twisted into expressions of disgust and hatred and disappointment. What are you? You finally ask. Because the fear has gone beyond terror into something else. Something numb and almost calm. The face stops shifting and settles into something that is not quite human. Features that are almost right, but wrong, in subtle ways that make your eyes hurt to look at directly. I am what rides with people like you, it says. People who are already alone in a crowd. People who have severed so many connections that they are barely tethered to the world anymore. I am the passenger you carry with you always. The voice in your head that tells you that you are not worth loving. I just made myself visible. You want to deny it. You want to scream that it is wrong, that you are worth something, that you matter. But the words stick in your throat because some part of you, some deep and honest part, knows that it is telling the truth. Not about being unworthy of love, but about the fact that you have been carrying this passenger for years. This voice, this constant companion of self-loathing and fear. You brought it with you into every relationship, every friendship, every moment of potential connection. You just never saw it sitting next to you before. The thing reaches out with hands that seem to have too many fingers, and it touches your shoulder. Its grip is cold and familiar, and somehow comforting in its awfulness. You do not have to stop at Diamond Lake, it whispers. You could just keep driving, forever. Just you and me and this empty road. You would not have to disappoint anyone else ever again. For a moment, you consider it. The thought of just driving into the darkness until the gas runs out, until the truck stops, until there is nothing left but silence and the passenger who has always been with you. It would be easier than facing another person, another relationship, another opportunity to fail. But then you see lights ahead. Just a few, scattered and warm, the beginning of a small town clinging to the edge of the highway. There are people there. Real people. People who might see you, might talk to you, might give you a chance to be something other than this hollow thing behind the wheel. You take your foot off the accelerator. The truck begins to slow, and the thing in the passenger seat hisses, its face cycling rapidly through every person you have ever hurt or abandoned or failed, trying to overwhelm you with guilt and shame and the certainty that you should just keep going, that you do not deserve to stop. that you do not deserve connection or community or comfort. But you pull into the parking lot of a small diner anyway. You put the truck in park, you turn off the engine, and when you look at the passenger seat, it is empty. Just cracked vinyl and the faint smell of citrus cologne fading into nothing. You sit there for a long time, hands still on the wheel, staring at that empty seat. You know it is not gone. Not really. That voice will be back, probably tomorrow, probably in an hour, probably the moment you are alone with your thoughts again. But right now, in this moment, you can see through the diner windows. You can see people sitting at the counter, drinking coffee, talking to each other, existing in the warm glow of fluorescent lights. They are not judging you. They do not know your failures. They are just people, and you are just a person. And maybe that is enough. You unlock the door. You step out of the truck. You walk toward the diner. And you do not look back at the passenger seat, because you know what you will see if you do. Some things are better left unseen, even when you know they are always there, riding shotgun through every mile of your life. The GPS showed the backroad connection between Highway 58 and Highway 242 as a thin gray line cutting through the Cascade Range. And he took it because the algorithm said it would save him 40 minutes. 40 minutes meant getting to the warehouse before it closed, meant getting paid on time, meant staying on schedule. He trusted the technology. He had 3 different navigation apps running simultaneously on his phone, mounted to the dashboard where he could see them all. The truck's built-in GPS, Google Maps, Waze. All 3 agreed this was the fastest route. And the data did not lie. The road was narrower than he expected, barely 2 lanes wide, with gravel shoulders that disappeared into thick stands of Douglas fir and hemlock that pressed close on both sides. But it was paved and well maintained, and his headlights cut through the darkness easily enough. The clock on the dashboard read 11:47 p.m. He would make it. He always made it. He was checking his speed when he noticed the trees in his passenger side mirror. They were moving, not swaying in wind, but actually moving, shifting position, getting closer to the road. He glanced at the mirror again, then out the passenger window. The forest was dense, yes, but it was not moving. It was just trees standing where trees should stand. He looked back at the road and told himself it was a trick of the headlights, a parallax effect caused by his motion relative to the stationary forest. But then his phone chimed. The Waze app had updated with a warning symbol he had never seen before. Not traffic, not construction, not even an accident. Just a red exclamation point with text that made no sense. Object in road. Proceed with caution. He dismissed it and kept driving. The trees in his mirror were definitely closer now. He could see individual trunks that had been farther back moments ago now, standing at the very edge of the road. He slowed down, then stopped completely, and the forest stopped too. For maybe 30 seconds, everything was perfectly still. The engine idled. The headlights illuminated 50 feet of empty pavement ahead. The trees stood motionless on both sides. Then he saw one move. A tall pine on the passenger side. It did not sway or bend. It lifted its root system out of the ground with a wet tearing sound that he could hear even through the closed windows of the cab. The roots reformed themselves into something like legs, tangled and jointed in ways that made his eyes hurt to track. The tree took a step toward the road. Then another. Then a dozen more trees around it did the same thing. He put the truck in gear and accelerated hard. The engine roared, and the tires grabbed asphalt, and he was moving again. 60 miles per hour on a road built for 40. not caring about safety or caution anymore because the trees were walking now. Actually walking. He could see them in both mirrors, a line of conifers stepping out of the forest on their root legs, moving onto the road behind him. His phone was going crazy. All 3 navigation apps were flashing warnings. The GPS was recalculating his route over and over, the screen flickering between different paths that all led nowhere. Google Maps had frozen on a satellite view that showed nothing but green forest in every direction, no roads visible at all. Waze was showing his location as a blue dot surrounded by hundreds of red hazard markers that filled the entire screen. He did not look at the phones anymore. He looked at the road and he drove. And in his mirrors, he watched the forest follow him. They were not running. They did not need to run. They were simply maintaining pace, 100 yards behind, maybe less. A wall of walking trees that stretched across the entire width of the road. Tall pines with roots that moved like spider legs. Thick firs that swayed as they walked, their branches reaching out toward each other. Hemlocks that bent and straightened with each step in a motion that looked almost like breathing. The road curved, and he took the turn too fast, feeling the trailer fishtail slightly before he corrected. The trees followed through the curve, perfectly coordinated, not losing any ground. He pressed the accelerator harder. 70 miles per hour now. 80. The truck was shaking and the engine was screaming, and the forest behind him was keeping pace. He tried his radio, CB first, clicking through channels, hearing nothing but static on every frequency until he reached channel 19 and heard something that froze his blood. It was not a voice. It was the sound of wind through branches, rhythmic and pulsing, matching the pace of the walking trees. He switched to FM and every station was broadcasting the same thing. Wind, branches, the sound of roots pulling free from soil. A tree appeared ahead of him, stepping out from the right side of the road. He swerved left and missed it by inches. Then another one emerged from the left and he swerved right. They were not just following anymore. They were ahead of him. They were surrounding him. He could see them in the headlights now, dozens of trees moving in from both sides, creating a narrowing corridor that he had to navigate at 85 miles per hour. One of them got close enough to scrape against the trailer, a screech of bark against metal that he felt through the entire truck. His side mirror showed the tree keeping pace for a moment, its branches reaching toward his window before it fell back and rejoined the mass behind him. They were testing him, learning his speed, figuring out his limits. His GPS suddenly showed a clear route ahead, a straight line for 3 miles, then a turn back onto Highway 242. Safety, civilization, roads that stayed in one place, and trees that stood still like they were supposed to. He just had to maintain his speed for 3 more miles. He could do that. The data said he could do that. But the forest was getting closer. He could see it, clearly now in his mirrors. The wall of walking trees that had closed to within 50 yards. They had learned his speed, and they were matching it, and now they were exceeding it. Roots lifted and fell in perfect synchronization, creating a sound like thunder that he could hear over the roar of his engine. Branches tangled together overhead, forming a canopy that blocked out the stars. 20 yards behind him, then 10. He could see individual pieces of bark, could count the number of trees in the front line. 30, 40. More emerging from the darkness behind them. An entire section of forest that had detached and was pursuing him with the focused intensity of a predator running down prey. His phone screens all showed the same thing now. No maps, no routes, just a simple message in plain text. You cannot outrun them. He reached down and threw the phone out the window without thinking, heard it shatter on the pavement behind him. The GPS screen went dark. The radio cut out. Everything electronic in the cab stopped working simultaneously, and he was alone with just the engine and the road and the forest that wanted him. 5 yards behind. Close enough that a branch scraped across his trailer again. Longer this time, more deliberate. They were reaching for him. He pushed the accelerator to the floor and felt the truck respond 90 miles per hour, 95. Speeds that were insane on this narrow mountain road. But he had no choice, because the alternative was letting them catch him, and he did not want to know what would happen then. The trees behind him suddenly spread out, forming a V shape with him at the point. They were herding him, channeling him towards something. He saw it ahead too late to react. A massive, old-growth Douglas fir standing in the middle of the road, its trunk wider than his trailer, its branches spread like arms, waiting to embrace. He hit the brakes hard, too hard, felt the trailer jackknife and the truck skid sideways. Time slowed down, and he could see everything with perfect clarity. The tree ahead, motionless, waiting. The forest behind, surging forward now that he was stopped. His hands on the wheel, white-knuckled and shaking. The road stretching away into darkness on both sides. The truck came to rest facing backward, headlights illuminating the wall of trees that had been chasing him. They were stopped now, maybe 20 feet away, their root legs planted firmly on the asphalt. They were not moving closer. They were just standing there, waiting, watching him with whatever passed for awareness in ambulatory trees. He sat frozen, engine still running, staring at them through the windshield. They stood in perfect formation, hundreds of trees arranged in precise rows, branches interlocked overhead. The Douglas fir that had forced him to stop was behind him now. And he could hear it moving, hear the creak of wood and the scrape of roots on pavement as it approached his trailer. The trees ahead parted suddenly, creating a path down the center of their formation. The path led back the way he had come, back to Highway 58, back to known roads and normal reality. They were showing him the way out. They were giving him a choice. He put the truck in gear and drove forward slowly, into the gap they had made. The trees stood perfectly still as he passed between them, close enough that he could have reached out and touched bark if he opened his window. Close enough that branches brushed gently across his cab and trailer as he navigated the narrow passage. The sound they made was almost like whispering, wood rubbing against wood in rhythms that suggested communication. It took him 10 minutes to drive through the formation. 10 minutes of maintaining 5 miles per hour while surrounded on all sides by trees that could have crushed his truck if they had wanted to. But they did not want to. They just watched as he passed, their branches tracking his movement, their root legs shifting slightly to maintain formation. When he finally emerged from the other end, the road ahead was clear and empty. He accelerated gradually back to normal speed and drove without stopping until he reached Highway 58. When he looked in his mirrors, the forest behind him was just forest again. Stationary. Normal. Trees standing where trees belonged. He pulled into the first rest stop he found and sat there until dawn, watching the tree line, waiting for movement that never came. When the sun rose and traffic began to pass on the highway, he checked his GPS. The back road he had taken did not exist on any map. The route between Highway 58 and Highway 242 showed only official state highways, nothing else. The thin gray line he had followed into the mountains was gone like it had never existed at all. He filed a report with the state police later that day. They thanked him for his concern and suggested he get some rest. He tried to explain about the walking trees, about the forest that detached and pursued him, about the impossible route that disappeared from every map. They nodded and took notes and gave him a card for a counselor who specialized in helping truck drivers deal with stress and fatigue. He has not driven through the Cascades at night since then. He takes the long routes now, the official highways with lights and traffic and witnesses. Sometimes he still opens his map apps late at night, checking to see if that thin gray line reappears. It never does. But when he drives past forests after dark, he watches them in his mirrors, counting the trees at the edge of the road, making sure they stay the same distance away, that they are not stepping forward on route legs, that they are not following him with whatever unknowable purpose they served. Some roads only exist when the forest wants them to exist. And some forests only let you pass once before they close the path forever. She had been driving Highway 395 through the high desert for 6 hours straight. And the landscape had not changed in all that time. Sagebrush, dry earth, the occasional outcropping of volcanic rock breaking through the soil like bones through skin. The sun had set an hour ago, and now there was only darkness pressing in from all sides, broken occasionally by distant lights that might have been towns or might have been stars reflected in some trick of the atmosphere. This was the loneliest road she had ever driven, and she had driven them all. The CB radio crackled to life on Channel 19, pulling her attention from the hypnotic white lines. She had been monitoring it out of habit more than necessity. Most nights on this route, the radio stayed quiet. Too few trucks, too much empty space between them. But now a voice came through, female, strained with barely controlled panic. "This is anyone on 395 southbound approaching Lakeview. I need help. Something is wrong with my truck, and I do not know what to do." She reached for her handset, ready to respond, but the voice continued before she could key the mic. "I am about 15 miles north of town. There is a rest area coming up on my right. Mile marker 187. I think I should pull over, but I am afraid to stop. The engine sounds wrong. It has been making this grinding noise for the last 10 minutes, and it is getting worse." She checked her odometer and felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. She was at mile marker 172, 15 miles north of Lakeview, the exact location the voice had described. She keyed her mic. "This is southbound on 395. I am at your location, but I do not see anyone. What is your position?" No response. The CB crackled with static, and then the voice came back, still talking as if she had not heard the response at all. "The temperature gauge just spiked into the red. There is smoke coming from under the hood. I can see it in my headlights. I have to pull over. I have to stop." She looked at her own temperature gauge. Normal. No smoke. No grinding sounds. Her truck was running perfectly. But as she watched, the temperature needle began to climb. Slowly at first, then faster. Within 30 seconds, it had moved from the center of the dial to the red zone at the top. "No," she said aloud to herself, to the empty cab. "No, this is not happening." The voice on the radio continued, and now it was unmistakable. The accent, the slight rasp from years of smoking that she had quit 5 years ago but that still haunted her voice in recordings, the particular way certain words were pronounced. It was her voice. She was listening to herself on the CB radio, describing her situation from some impossible future that was approaching with the inevitability of mile markers ticking past. "I am pulling into the rest area now. The truck is shaking. Something is very wrong." The voice paused, and she could hear breathing, fast and shallow. "There are no other vehicles here. The rest area is empty. Just one light above the bathroom building, but it is flickering. I should call for help, but my phone has no signal out here." She grabbed her own phone from the cup holder. No signal. 4 bars had dropped to 0 in the span of seconds. Ahead, in her headlights, she saw the sign for a rest area. Mile marker 187, the exact place the voice had described. Her truck was shaking now. The grinding sound had started, a deep metallic scraping that came from somewhere in the engine compartment. Black smoke began seeping from under the hood, thin wisps at first, then thicker clouds that her headlights turned into ghostly shapes in the darkness ahead. She had a choice. She could keep driving, ignore what the voice was telling her, refuse to pull into that rest area and break whatever chain of events was unfolding. But the temperature gauge was buried in the red now, and the smoke was getting worse. And if she did not stop soon, the engine would seize completely, and she would be stranded on the highway in the dark, with no phone signal and no help coming. The voice on the radio made the decision for her. I have pulled into the rest area. I am shutting off the engine. The smoke is everywhere. I cannot see anything outside the cab. I am going to wait for it to clear before I get out to check the damage. She found herself doing exactly what the voice described. Pulling into the rest area, shutting off the engine, watching smoke billow around her truck in thick black clouds that blotted out everything beyond her windows. She sat with her hands still on the wheel, listening to the radio, listening to herself describe what would happen next. The smoke is clearing. I can see the bathroom building now. The light is still flickering. I should check under the hood, but I do not want to get out. There is something wrong with this place. I cannot explain it, but everything feels wrong. The smoke outside her cab began to thin and disperse, and she could see the rest area taking shape in the darkness. A small concrete building housing bathrooms, a picnic table under a dead tree. The single light above the building flickering exactly as the voice had said, casting unstable shadows that moved with no relationship to anything real. She keyed her mic, trying to break the loop, trying to communicate with whatever version of herself was speaking. Stop. Do not get out of the truck. Whatever you are going to do, do not do it. But the voice continued without pause. I am getting out now. I need to see what is wrong with the engine. I need to know if I can fix it, or if I will be stranded here until morning. Her hand moved to the door handle without her conscious decision. She was operating on autopilot, following a script that had already been written, acting out events that had somehow already occurred. She pulled the handle, and the door opened, and the night air rushed in, cold and dry and smelling of smoke and sagebrush. The hood is hot. I can feel the heat radiating off it. I am using my jacket to protect my hand while I release the latch. She was at the front of her truck now, doing exactly what the voice described, using her jacket, releasing the latch. Steam and smoke poured out when the hood lifted, and she waved it away, coughing, trying to see the engine beneath. The voice on the radio, her voice, was crying now. I can see the problem. The serpentine belt has shredded. Pieces of it are wrapped around the pulleys. But that is not what worries me. There is something else in the engine compartment. Something that should not be there. Something moving. She leaned closer, shining her phone's flashlight into the engine bay. The belt was destroyed, exactly as the voice had said. Ribbons of black rubber hung from various components. But there was something else. Something pale and organic pressed between the engine block and the radiator. It pulsed slowly, rhythmically, like tissue that was breathing. I do not know what I'm looking at. It looks like flesh, like something alive has grown into the engine. I need to touch it. I need to know what it is. No, she said aloud, backing away from the truck. I am not doing that. I am breaking the pattern. I am not touching it. But her hand was already reaching forward, drawn by the same compulsion that had pulled her into the rest area. that had made her open the hood, that was guiding her through actions that felt simultaneously like free will and absolute inevitability. Her fingers made contact with the pale flesh, and it was warm and wet, and it contracted under her touch. The voice on the radio screamed, "It has me. It is pulling me in. My hand is stuck. I cannot pull away. It is so strong. Help me. Someone please help me." She felt it then. The flesh had wrapped around her wrist like fingers, tightening, pulling her hand deeper into the engine compartment. She braced her other hand against the truck's grill and pulled hard. But the grip only tightened. Her arm was being drawn in past her elbow now, the metal edges of the engine bay cutting into her skin. The voice on the radio was sobbing. Her voice, describing exactly what she was feeling in this moment, the pain and terror and helplessness. And then the voice said something that made her blood freeze. "Someone is coming. I can hear footsteps behind me. Slow footsteps, deliberate. Someone was here the whole time, watching, waiting for me to get trapped. I cannot turn around. I cannot see them. But I can hear them getting closer." She heard them too. Footsteps on gravel. Steady and unhurried, coming from the direction of the bathroom building, from the shadows beyond the flickering light. She tried to look back over her shoulder, but her position bent over the engine made it impossible to see. The thing in the engine pulled harder, and her shoulder slammed into the grill. And she felt her arm being drawn in up to her bicep. They are right behind me now. I can feel them standing there, watching. I am going to turn my head. I am going to see who they are. She forced her head to turn despite the pain, despite the impossible angle. And she saw a figure standing 5 feet behind her. Tall, wearing clothes that were wrong somehow, outdated, rotting. The face was in shadow, but the posture was one of patient waiting. The figure had been standing there all along, she realized. Standing there when she pulled in. Standing there when she got out. Standing there invisible in the smoke and darkness until this precise moment when she was trapped and helpless. The voice on the radio spoke its final words. "They are reaching for me. I can see their hand now. The fingers are too long. I am sorry. I should have kept driving. I should have ignored everything and just kept..." The transmission cut off abruptly, replaced by static. And in the same instant, the figure behind her touched her back. The hand was cold. The fingers were indeed too long, wrapping around her torso with too many joints. The thing in the engine pulled with tremendous force, and her feet left the ground, and she was being drawn into the machinery, metal tearing flesh, bones breaking against hard edges. Her last coherent thought was that somewhere, somehow, another version of herself was driving this same stretch of highway. Maybe 10 minutes behind, maybe an hour. And that version was listening to her CB radio, listening to a voice describing engine trouble near mile marker 187, describing pulling into a rest area, describing everything that was about to happen. And that version would follow the same path because how could she not? How could anyone escape a future that announced itself with such terrible clarity? The figure's other hand clamped over her mouth, cutting off her scream. The thing in the engine pulled once more, final and irresistible. And the rest area fell silent except for the crackle of the CB radio in her abandoned truck, where her voice continued to broadcast, describing these same events to the next driver who would hear them 10 minutes from now, or an hour from now, or tomorrow night. The voice explaining in perfect detail what was about to happen. The voice that could be heard, but never heeded. The confession that was both warning and invitation to the same inescapable fate. The flickering light above the bathroom building went out completely. The smoke dispersed into the night. The rest area became just another empty space along the loneliest road in Oregon, waiting in darkness for the next truck to arrive, for the next driver to hear their own voice describing their own death with the precision of prophecy and the helplessness of history that has already been written. He should have reached the junction 20 minutes ago. The GPS said it was 12 miles from where he had turned onto Highway 126, and he had been driving at a steady 55 miles per hour, which meant he should have covered that distance easily. But the junction had not appeared. The highway just kept going, straight and empty, cutting through the Willamette Valley with fields on both sides that looked identical no matter how far he drove. He was not concerned at first. GPS systems made mistakes sometimes, especially on rural routes where updates lagged behind road changes. He would reach the junction eventually. He just needed to keep driving and stay alert for the signs. The dashboard clock read 2:17 a.m. He had plenty of time to make his delivery. Everything was fine. Mile marker 126 passed on his right. He had been watching the markers carefully for the last 10 minutes, using them to track his progress. The next one should be 127, then 128, and somewhere around 130 or 131 he would see the junction. Simple mathematics, simple navigation, nothing complicated. But when the next mile marker appeared in his headlights, it read 126 again. He slowed down and stared at it as he passed. Definitely a 126. The same number as the previous marker. That made no sense. Mile markers increased sequentially. That was their entire purpose. Maybe he had misread the first one. Maybe it had been 125 and this was 126, and his tired brain was playing tricks on him. He had been driving for 11 hours straight. Fatigue could cause mistakes like that. He checked his odometer. He had traveled exactly 1 mile since the last marker. The distance was correct, even if the number was not. He kept driving, watching for the next marker, determined to pay closer attention this time. Mile marker 126 appeared again. This time he stopped completely, pulling onto the shoulder and putting the truck in park. He sat there for a moment, hands on the wheel, trying to think through what was happening. 3 identical mile markers in a row was not possible. Someone must have installed duplicates by mistake. Road maintenance crew error. It happened. It was the only logical explanation. He looked at the fields on both sides of the highway. Flat and dark, disappearing into darkness beyond the reach of his headlights. No buildings, no lights. No signs of human activity except the road itself. The moon was a thin crescent overhead, providing almost no illumination. Everything looked exactly the same in every direction. He put the truck back in gear and continued driving. The next mile marker would be different. It had to be. Maybe 127, maybe back to 125. But it would be something other than 126 because the alternative was impossible, and he did not believe in impossible things. Mile marker 126. He drove faster now, pushing the speed to 65, then 70. The mile markers kept coming at regular intervals, and every single one read 126. He counted them. 10 in a row, 15, 20, all identical, all placed exactly 1 mile apart according to his odometer. But the numbers never changed. He tried his phone, no signal. He tried the CB radio, pure static on every channel. The FM radio picked up nothing but dead air and occasional bursts of interference that sounded almost like music but never resolved into anything recognizable. He was alone on this highway, with no way to communicate and no way to know if anyone else in the world even knew this road existed. After the 30th marker, he started noticing other things. Subtle things. The white center line was faded in one particular spot, about a quarter mile past each marker. There was a specific section of shoulder where the gravel had spread onto the pavement, creating a gray patch about 6 feet long. A reflector post on the right side was bent at a slight angle. These details repeated. Exactly. Every mile. The same faded spot in the center line. The same gravel patch. The same bent reflector post. He was not passing through different sections of highway that happened to look similar. He was passing through the same section of highway over and over again. He was trapped in a loop measuring exactly 1 mile, and he had no idea how to escape it. He stopped the truck again and got out, standing on the shoulder in the cold night air. He walked to the mile marker and examined it closely. It was real. Solid metal on a wooden post, painted green with reflective white numbers. Official Department of Transportation equipment. Nothing strange or unusual about it, except the fact that it said 126, and he had seen 40 identical copies of it in the last 40 miles. He walked to the front of his truck and looked at the road ahead. It stretched straight into darkness, looking completely normal. Behind him, the road looked the same. To his left, the field. To his right, the field. No landmarks, no distinguishing features. Just road and empty land repeating infinitely in every direction. He got back in the truck and made a decision. He would drive the mile again, but this time he would pay attention to the exact moment when the loop reset. There had to be a seam somewhere, a point where the end became the beginning, where reality folded back on itself. If he could identify that point, maybe he could understand what was happening. Maybe he could find a way out. He drove slowly, methodically, watching everything. The faded center line appeared right on schedule. The gravel patch passed beneath his wheels. The bent reflector post flickered in his headlights. And then, about 3/4 of a mile from the marker, he felt it. Not a physical sensation exactly, but a momentary disorientation, like stepping off a curb he had not seen. A brief sense of discontinuity. He looked in his rearview mirror and saw nothing behind him. No road, no mile marker, just darkness. He looked forward and saw the highway continuing normally. He checked his odometer, and it had reset to 0. The clock on his dashboard still read 2:17 a.m., the same time it had shown when he first noticed the repeating markers. Time was looping too. He drove through the loop again, counting seconds in his head. The entire circuit took exactly 8 minutes at his current speed. 8 minutes to travel 1 mile that somehow connected to itself, creating a closed circuit with no beginning or end. He was not driving on a highway anymore. He was driving on a Mobius strip of asphalt that existed outside normal space. On the 5th loop, he noticed the fields had changed. The darkness was deeper somehow, more absolute. When he shined his flashlight out the window, the beam seemed to stop after about 20 feet, absorbed by the black rather than reflecting back. The air smelled different too. Less like earth and growing things, more like concrete and stale water. On the 10th loop, the center line was no longer just faded, but actively crumbling, gaps appearing in the paint that widened with each circuit. The gravel patch had grown larger, spreading across half the lane. The bent reflector post had bent further, now angled at 45 degrees instead of the original slight tilt. On the 15th loop, he saw the first crack in the pavement, a thin line running perpendicular to his direction of travel, barely visible in his headlights. By the 20th loop, the crack had widened into a fissure 6 inches across and growing. The fields on both sides were no longer fields, but empty voids of pure darkness that his headlights could not penetrate at all. On the 30th loop, the mile marker itself was decaying. The paint had faded to a dull gray. The metal was rusting in real time, brown stains spreading across the surface like blood seeping through a bandage. The wooden post was splitting, long cracks running through the grain. He tried driving off the road on the 35th loop, turning the wheel hard and heading into what had once been a field. The truck drove forward normally for about 10 feet, then hit an invisible barrier that stopped it dead, engine still running but wheels finding no purchase. He backed up onto the highway, and the truck moved normally again. He was confined to the road. This mile of road. Nothing else existed anymore. On the 50th loop, the pavement was more cracked than solid surface. He had to navigate carefully, avoiding the worst of the fissures that now crossed the highway in dozens of places. The mile marker had collapsed entirely, just a pile of rusted metal and rotted wood. But each time he completed the circuit, it was standing again when he came around, a little more decayed than before, but still marking the same impossible mile. The dashboard clock had finally started moving on the 60th loop. 2:17 became 2:18. But his calculations said he had been driving for 8 hours. 8 hours completing 8-minute loops, watching reality decay around him, trapped in a mile of highway that was falling apart in slow motion. On the 75th loop, he saw another vehicle. A car, old and rusted, sitting on the shoulder ahead. He slowed as he approached it, hoping desperately for another person, for someone who could help or explain or even just confirm that he was not losing his mind. But when his headlights illuminated the car, he saw it was empty, abandoned. The windows were broken and weeds were growing through the chassis, even though there were no weeds anywhere else. The car was still there on the 76th loop, and the 77th, a permanent addition to the circuit. He realized with growing horror that it had probably belonged to someone else who had been trapped here, who had eventually given up and left their vehicle behind. How long ago? How many loops had they completed before they stopped? What had happened to them after they left the car? On the 90th loop, his truck began to show signs of decay. Small rust spots appeared on the hood. The paint was fading. The steering wheel felt different under his hands, the plastic degrading into something softer and more fragile. He was decaying too, he realized. Not dying exactly, but wearing down, becoming part of the loop's slow entropy. He stopped counting after 100 loops. The road was barely passable now, great sections of pavement missing entirely, forcing him to navigate across bare earth that matched the void around it. The mile marker was just a stain on the ground where it had dissolved. His truck sputtered and coughed, mechanical systems failing one by one as whatever force governed this place stripped them away. He no longer remembered what he had been hauling or where he had been going. Those details belonged to a world that felt increasingly distant and unreal. The only reality was the loop, the 8 minutes, the slow decay, the eternal return to the same point on a road that led nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. His last coherent thought, before exhaustion and despair finally claimed him, was that the highway had not trapped him. He had never left it. He had been driving this same mile forever, and everything before it was just a dream he had told himself while the loop ran its endless course. The other roads, the other trucks, the destinations and deliveries and human connections were fictions invented by a mind that could not accept the truth. There was only Highway 126. There was only mile marker 126. There was only the loop and the decay, and the 8 minutes that never ended, world without end, asphalt and darkness forever. He kept the photograph taped to his dashboard where he could see it every time he glanced away from the road. His 2 daughters, ages 7 and 9, smiling at the camera with gap-toothed grins and messy hair. The photo was 3 years old now, taken before he had started driving long-haul routes, back when he had been home every night for dinner and bedtime stories. But the routes paid better. and his family needed the money. So he spent his nights on highways instead of in his daughter's bedroom reading about princesses and dragons. Highway 22 through the Santiam Pass was familiar territory. He had driven it dozens of times, knew every curve and grade, every scenic overlook and rest area. Tonight, the road was wet from recent rain, the pavement gleaming black in his headlights, puddles collecting in the low spots where the asphalt had settled unevenly over the years. It was almost midnight, and he had the highway entirely to himself. The first time he saw the child, he thought it was just a reflection of his own headlights playing tricks in a puddle. A pale shape, small and indistinct, visible for just a moment as he passed. He did not think much of it. Tired eyes saw all kinds of things on night drives. Shadows became deer, reflections became people. The mind filled in details that were not really there. But then he saw it again in his side mirror. A child standing on the shoulder behind him, visible for just a second before the angle changed and the image was gone. He looked in his rearview mirror, but saw only empty road. No child. Nothing but wet pavement and darkness. He told himself it was nothing. Exhaustion creating phantoms. He had been driving for 9 hours with only brief stops for fuel and food. His mind was playing tricks. That was all. Perfectly normal. Perfectly explainable. The child appeared in a puddle 5 minutes later. This time he saw it clearly in the brief instant before his tires sent up spray that obscured everything. A girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, with long dark hair and pale skin. She had been standing in the water. Or rather, her reflection had been there, even though no physical child stood above the puddle. Just the reflection. Just the image. He slowed down without really deciding to. Some instinct telling him that something was wrong, that he needed to pay attention. The road climbed steadily into the mountains, passing through dense forest on both sides. Detroit Lake was somewhere off to his left, invisible in the darkness, but present in the way the air smelled of water and pine. His passenger window caught a reflection from his dome light, and the child was there. Standing outside the truck, keeping pace with his speed, running alongside him through the forest. Her face was pressed close to the glass, close enough that he could see her features clearly now. She was not looking at the road or at where she was running. She was looking directly at him. He jerked his eyes back to the highway, heart pounding. When he looked again at the window, it showed only darkness and trees. No child. The reflection had vanished, but his hands were shaking on the wheel, and his breath came fast and shallow. The chrome of his side mirror caught the next image. The child standing in the bed of his trailer, riding along with him, her small hands gripping the edge for balance. The same pale face, the same dark hair, the same eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. He looked directly at the trailer in his mirror and saw nothing on it. Just when he looked at the chrome, at the reflective surfaces, she appeared. He thought about his own daughters and felt a stab of protective fear that made no sense. This child was not his children. This child was not even real. She was a trick of light and reflection, a product of fatigue and darkness and too many hours alone on empty roads. She could not hurt him. She could not hurt anyone. She was not there. But she kept appearing. In every reflective surface, every puddle, every window, every piece of chrome and polished metal. She was getting closer each time. At first, she'd been distant, standing on the shoulder or visible only as a blur in passing water. Now she was right next to the truck, sometimes touching it, her pale hands leaving no prints on the wet metal, but visible nevertheless in the reflected images. He tried turning on the interior lights, to eliminate the reflections in his windows. But the light only made it worse. Now he could see her in the windshield too, superimposed over the road ahead, walking backward in front of the truck, facing him, never breaking eye contact. She was mouthing something, words he could not hear, a message he could not read. His phone screen caught her image when he glanced at his GPS. She was in the truck now, sitting in the passenger seat that he knew was empty, her small body perched where no physical form existed. The phone showed her clearly, a perfect reflection of something that was not there. When he looked at the actual seat, he saw nothing. When he looked at any reflective surface, she was there. He pulled over at a rest area near Detroit Lake, needing to stop, needing to think, needing to understand what was happening. The parking lot was empty, lit by a single flickering light that created more shadows than illumination. He sat in the cab with the engine running, staring at the photograph of his daughters, trying to ground himself in something real and solid and known. The child appeared in the photo, standing behind his daughters in an image he had looked at 1,000 times. She had not been there before. He knew every detail of that photograph, had memorized his daughter's expressions and the background and the way the sunlight caught their hair. The pale child with dark hair had not been in the photo. But she was there now, standing behind his girls, her hands on their shoulders, her face solemn and sad. He grabbed the photo and flipped it over, hands shaking so badly he almost dropped it. When he turned it back, the child was still there. Closer now, leaning between his daughters, her face level with theirs, her arms around their shoulders, protective, possessive, claiming. He threw the photo down and looked up, and she was everywhere. In his rearview mirror, sitting in the back of the cab, in his side mirrors, standing outside both doors, in the windshield, pressed against the glass from the outside, her breath fogging it, even though she was not physically there. In every reflective surface simultaneously, surrounding him, closing in, getting closer with each appearance. He got out of the truck without thinking, driven by panic and the need to escape. The night air was cold and damp, and he could hear the lake lapping against the shore somewhere in the darkness. He looked at the truck's polished paint and saw her reflection in every panel. Multiple versions of the same child, all watching him from different angles, all moving independently, but all focused on him with the same unwavering attention. There was a bathroom building at the edge of the lot, concrete and institutional, with a metal door that reflected his flashlight beam. He walked toward it, thinking vaguely that he could splash cold water on his face, that he could break whatever fugue state had taken hold of him. But as he approached, he saw that the metal door was covered in her images. Dozens of reflections, overlapping and shifting, creating a mosaic of the same pale face and dark hair and sad eyes. He backed away and turned to his truck, and she was standing between him and it. Not a reflection this time, a physical presence, solid and real and undeniable. The child stood in the parking lot wearing clothes that looked old, a simple dress that might have been white once, but was now gray and stained. Her feet were bare. Her hair hung in wet tangles. And when she opened her mouth to speak, he heard a voice that came from everywhere and nowhere, echoing across the empty lot. "They took us into the woods," she said. "All of us children from the camp. They said it was an accident. They said the fire spread too fast. But we know the truth. They left us there. They locked the doors and left us there to burn." He wanted to run, but his legs would not move. He wanted to speak, but his voice had frozen in his throat. He could only stand and stare as the child took a step closer, her bare feet leaving wet prints on the dry pavement. "We have been here so long," she continued, "waiting by the lake where they dumped what was left of us, waiting for someone who would see, someone who would remember, someone who has children of their own and understands what was taken from us." She was close enough now that he could smell the smoke on her, could see the burns on her skin beneath the dirt and water damage. She was not a living child. She had never been alive, not in his lifetime. She was something that had died decades ago, something that had lingered in this place, trapped between the world of reflections and the world of substance. "You have to tell them," she said. And now her voice was not one voice, but many. A chorus of children speaking in unison. "You have to tell them we did not die in an accident. You have to tell them we were murdered. You have to tell them we are still here, waiting, watching, remembering." Then she was gone, not fading gradually or walking away, but simply ceasing to exist between one moment and the next. The parking lot was empty, except for him and his truck, and the flickering light casting its unstable shadows. He stood there for a long time, shaking, trying to process what had happened, trying to decide if it had been real or if his exhausted mind had finally broken under the strain of too many nights alone. He got back in his truck and sat there until dawn, too afraid to look at any reflective surface, too afraid to close his eyes and see what might be waiting behind his eyelids. When the sun finally rose and morning traffic began to pass on the highway, he started his engine and drove away from that place, leaving the rest area and Detroit Lake behind. But the child came with him. Not physically, not standing beside him or sitting in his passenger seat, but present nevertheless in every reflection. She was always there now, visible whenever he looked at his mirrors or his phone screen or any surface that could show him his own image. She stood behind him, her hands on his shoulders, her face sad and patient and eternally waiting. He stopped driving long-haul routes after that, took a job closer to home, one that let him be with his daughters every night. He told his wife it was because he missed his family too much, because the money was not worth the time away. He never mentioned the child. He never spoke about what he had seen at Detroit Lake. But sometimes, when he looks at photographs of his daughters, he sees another child standing with them, pale and sad and forever young. A ghost who found him on a wet highway through the mountains. A voice for the forgotten dead who chose him to carry their story. And in every reflection, she is watching, waiting, reminding him that some things cannot be driven away, that some passengers ride with you forever, whether you acknowledge them or not. He had seen death before. 3 tours in the Marines, 2 in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan, had shown him more than most people would see in 10 lifetimes. He had watched friends die. He had killed enemies. He had walked through villages where death hung in the air like humidity. So when people asked him if he believed in ghosts, he always gave the same answer. The dead stay dead. They do not come back. They do not haunt. They just stop existing. And the world moves on without them. Highway 97 through the Ochoko Mountains was a route he drove once a month, hauling timber from the mills near Bend up to Washington. It was lonely country, high desert transitioning to pine forest, with small ghost towns like Shaniko marking the spots where civilization had tried and failed to take root. He liked the emptiness. After years of noise and chaos and constant threat, the silence of these roads felt like medicine. It was just past midnight when he saw the first truck. An old Peterbilt, maybe from the 70s. Its chrome dulled with age and its paint faded to a color that might have been red once, but was now closer to rust. It was pulled over on the shoulder about a quarter-mile ahead, emergency flashers blinking in the darkness. He slowed down as he approached, checking to see if the driver needed help. That was the code among truckers. You did not pass someone in trouble without at least asking. But as his headlights swept across the old Peterbilt, he saw that no one was standing beside it. The cab appeared empty. The flashers continued their rhythmic pulse, but there was no sign of the driver. He considered pulling over anyway, but something about the truck made him uneasy. It looked wrong somehow. Too clean for its apparent age. Too perfectly positioned on the shoulder. Too still, as if it was not really a truck at all, but a photograph of one. A two-dimensional image pretending to have depth. He drove past it and checked his mirror. The old Peterbilt was pulling back onto the highway behind him, its lights coming on, falling into line about 100 yards back. He had not seen anyone get in. He had not seen it start. It was just suddenly there, moving, following him through the darkness. He told himself the driver had been in the cab the whole time, maybe sleeping, maybe on the radio. He told himself there was nothing strange about another truck heading north on the same highway at the same time. It was a coincidence. That was all. But his hands tightened on the wheel anyway, and he found himself watching his mirrors more than the road. The second truck appeared 5 miles later. A Kenworth, older than the Peterbilt, its design suggesting the 60s, or maybe even the 50s. It was parked at an overlook, facing the highway, its headlights dark. As he passed, the headlights came on. The truck pulled out behind him, falling into line behind the Peterbilt. 2 trucks now, both old, both empty, both following him with a precision that felt deliberate. The third truck was a Mack, ancient and boxy, the kind his grandfather might have driven. It joined the convoy from a side road he had not even noticed, appearing out of the darkness like it had materialized from nothing. 3 trucks in a line behind him, maintaining perfect spacing, their headlights creating a procession that stretched back into the night. He tried the CB radio, channel 19 first, then working through all the others. Nothing but static. He tried his phone. No signal, even though he knew this stretch of highway usually had decent coverage. He was alone except for the trucks behind him, the trucks that kept multiplying, that kept adding to their number with each passing mile. A Freightliner joined from the southbound lane, crossing over in front of oncoming traffic that did not exist, falling into line. Then a white. Then a diamond T that looked like it belonged in a museum. Then more, their makes and models spanning decades, each one older and stranger than the last. Some of them should not have been running at all. Some of them should have been scrap metal 40 years ago. But they were there, real and solid, following him through the mountains in a convoy that now numbered more than a dozen. He accelerated, pushing his truck to 70, then 80. The convoy matched his speed effortlessly. He slowed to 40. They slowed with him. They were not trying to pass. They were not trying to catch him. They were just there, maintaining their formation, keeping pace, waiting for something. The lead truck, the old Peterbilt that had started all this, began to pull alongside him. He did not look at it. He kept his eyes on the road ahead, but he could see it in his peripheral vision, could see its chrome glinting in his headlights, could see the way it moved with an unnatural smoothness, like it was not really driving, but gliding. It matched his speed perfectly, staying alongside, and he could not help himself. He looked. He looked at the cab and saw the driver for the first time. A man, middle-aged, wearing clothes from another era. The driver was looking back at him, and his eyes were hollow, empty spaces where eyes should have been. The driver smiled, and his teeth were broken and stained, and he raised one hand off his steering wheel and pointed ahead. Following the gesture, he saw it. A mile marker, green and white, standing on the shoulder. Mile marker 97. But there was something written beneath the number, spray-painted in red letters that should not have been there. A date. And as he passed close enough to read it, he felt his stomach drop. It was tomorrow's date. The day after today. A date that had not happened yet. The Peterbilt dropped back, and another truck took its place. This one was even older, a haze from the 40s or 30s, impossibly ancient, its body held together with what looked like rust and willpower. The driver was younger, wearing a military uniform that belonged to World War II. His face was burned, skin blackened and peeling, and he raised his hand and pointed ahead just like the first driver had. Another mile marker appeared. Mile marker 98. Same red letters beneath the number. Same date. Tomorrow's date. The date he was supposed to die. The trucks took turns pulling alongside him after that. Each one had a driver. Each driver looked different, wore different clothes from different decades, showed different signs of how they had died. Crushed skulls, twisted necks, bodies burned or broken or torn apart. Each one pointed ahead. Each one showed him another mile marker with that same date written in red. He understood now what they were. These were the men who had died on this highway. Decades of truckers who had crashed or broken down or simply vanished, who had met their ends on this stretch of road through the Ochoco Mountains. They were showing him his future. They were showing him that he was going to join them. That somewhere ahead, on one of these curves or hills or straight stretches, something would happen. An animal in the road, ice on the pavement, a mechanical failure. It did not matter what. The result would be the same. Tomorrow's date, his name added to the list, his truck added to the convoy, mile marker 99 passed, mile marker 100, each one marked with red, each one counting down to something inevitable. The convoy had grown to 30 trucks now, maybe more, all following, all waiting, all patient because they had nothing but time and he was running out of it. He tried to turn off the highway, but every side road he approached had a truck blocking it. One of the ghost trucks parked across the entrance, its driver watching with those hollow eyes, making sure he stayed on course. He tried to stop, pulling onto the shoulder and shutting off his engine. But the trucks pulled over too, forming a semicircle around him, their engines idling, their drivers visible in their cabs, waiting for him to continue. When he started his engine again, they followed. When he pulled back onto the highway, they reformed their convoy. Mile markers 105, the date in red. His hands were shaking on the wheel now, sweat running down his face despite the cold night air. He was looking for it, whatever it was, whatever would kill him. But the road looked normal, empty and dark and perfectly safe. There was no danger visible, no obvious threat. Just mile markers counting up and ghost trucks following and a date written in red that promised his death. One of the trucks pulled alongside again. This driver was recent, modern clothes, modern haircut. The truck was from the 90s, not ancient like the others. The driver's neck was bent at an impossible angle, his head lolling to one side, and he was not pointing forward like the others. He was pointing at something on the dashboard, a logbook. He was holding it up against his window, showing pages filled with violations. Too many hours. Too little sleep. Days of driving without proper rest. The realization hit like a physical blow. He checked his own logbook, the hours he had been recording. He had been fudging the numbers for weeks, driving longer than he should, skipping required rest periods, pushing himself to make more deliveries and earn more money. He was exhausted. He had been fighting sleep for the last hour, had felt his eyes closing, had caught himself drifting in his lane more than once. The trucks were not going to kill him. He was going to kill himself. Somewhere in the next few miles, he would fall asleep at the wheel. He would drift off the road or into oncoming traffic. The crash would come tomorrow, in the early morning hours, just as the red letters promised. And after, he would join the convoy. He would drive these roads forever, hollow-eyed and dead, following the next driver who was heading toward his own date, written in red. Mile marker 110 appeared ahead. He could see something written on it, even from a distance. More red letters. But as he got closer, he realized it was not a date this time. It was 2 words. Pull over. He looked at the trucks surrounding him. They had all stopped following. They were just scattered along the highway now, parked at various points, their drivers watching, waiting to see what he would do. The Peterbilt that had started everything was ahead of him, pulled onto the shoulder, its emergency flashers blinking just like they had been when he first saw it. The driver was standing beside it now, visible in the darkness, and he was pointing at the shoulder. Not threatening, not demanding, just pointing, showing him where to stop. He pulled over. He shut off his engine. He sat there in the silence, hands still on the wheel, heart pounding, trying to process what had just happened. The convoy of ghost trucks remained visible in his mirrors for maybe 30 seconds, their headlights creating a string of lights that stretched back along the highway. Then, one by one, they blinked out. The trucks vanished like they had never existed at all. He climbed into his sleeper berth and lay there shaking. He did not sleep, could not sleep, but he stayed parked for 6 hours until dawn broke over the mountains. When he finally started his engine again and pulled back onto the highway, he drove carefully, slowly, watching for any sign of the convoy. But the road was empty. Normal traffic began to appear as morning progressed, other truckers on their routes, cars heading to work. The world returned to its regular rhythm. He never drove that route at night again. He scheduled his runs to pass through the Ochoko Mountains during daylight only. And he kept his logbook honest after that, recording real hours, taking required rest breaks, never pushing beyond his limits. Because he had seen the convoy of the dead, and he understood what they had shown him. Not that death was inevitable, but that it was a choice. The date written, in red, had not been a prophecy. It had been a warning, a chance to change his path before it was too late. The dead do not always come back to haunt. Sometimes they come back to save. You need this bonus. That is the thought that keeps running through your mind as you pull out of the warehouse at Santiam Junction, your trailer loaded and sealed. The paperwork promising an extra $2,000 if you make the delivery to Sisters before dawn. $2,000 means rent paid on time. $2,000 means your daughter gets the winter coat she needs. $2,000 means you can stop choosing between groceries and gas. So when the dispatcher tells you the load is sealed and you cannot open it under any circumstances, you sign the papers without asking questions. Highway 20 through the Cascade Wilderness is empty at this hour, just past 1 in the morning, and you settle into the familiar rhythm of the drive. The road climbs steadily into the mountains, pine trees pressing close on both sides, their branches creating tunnels of darkness that your headlights struggle to penetrate. You have driven this route 100 times. You know every curve and grade. This should be easy money. The first indication that something is wrong comes 10 miles into the drive. The truck feels heavier. Not dramatically, just enough that you notice the engine working a little harder on the inclines, the brakes responding a fraction slower when you need them. You check your mirrors. The trailer looks normal, sealed, unchanged. You tell yourself it is just the grade, just the mountain road requiring more power. Nothing unusual, nothing to worry about. But 5 miles later, the heaviness has increased. You can feel it now in the way the steering responds, the way the whole rig handles differently, like you are hauling significantly more weight than when you started. You glance at the paperwork clipped to your visor. Manifest says 40,000 pounds. Your truck is rated for 80,000. You should have plenty of capacity. But something feels wrong. You activate your Bluetooth headset, a habit you developed months ago, recording audio notes during long drives to help you stay alert. Your voice sounds tight when you speak. Mile marker 15, 1:23 a.m. Something is off with the load. Truck is handling heavy. Going to monitor the situation. The road narrows as you climb higher into the mountains, and you notice another change. The trailer is pulling differently now. The weight distribution shifted somehow. It feels like whatever is back there has moved or grown or multiplied. That last thought makes no sense, so you push it away and focus on driving. The bonus. Think about the bonus. Think about your daughter's face when you can afford to get her that coat. Mile marker 20 appears in your headlights, and the truck groans as you take a curve. The sound is metal under stress, bolts and welds protesting weight they were not designed to carry. You check the side mirrors again, and this time you see it. The trailer is sitting lower on its axles, noticeably lower, like the suspension is compressing under increasing load. Mile marker 20, 1:35 a.m. Trailer suspension is compressed. Whatever is back there, it is getting heavier. This does not make sense. Nothing just gains weight. Physics does not work that way. Your voice is shaking now, and you can hear the fear creeping in. You consider pulling over to check the load, but the paperwork was explicit. Sealed trailer. Do not open under any circumstances. And more practically, you are in the middle of wilderness. No cell signal, no other traffic. If you stop and something is wrong, you will be alone with it in the dark. Better to keep moving. Better to get to Sisters where there are people and lights and help if you need it. At mile marker 25, you hear the first sound from the trailer. It is faint, barely audible over the engine and road noise, but unmistakable once you notice it. A wet sound. Organic. Like something living and moving and fluid. Your hands tighten on the wheel and your breath comes faster. Did you hear that? Please tell me that was the road. Please tell me that was anything except what it sounded like. You are talking to the recorder now. Talking to yourself. Talking to anyone who might listen to this later. The sound comes again, louder this time. Wet and rhythmic, like breathing. Like something massive inhaling and exhaling in the darkness behind you. The truck is struggling now. You have your foot pressed hard on the accelerator, but your speed keeps dropping. 35 miles per hour on a straight section where you should be doing 55. The engine is screaming, and the transmission is hunting for gears, and the whole rig is shaking with effort. You hit a weigh station scale at mile marker 30, one of those portable ones they set up randomly to catch overweight trucks. The digital display flashes as you roll across it, and what you see makes your stomach drop. 78,000 pounds. You started at 40,000. In 30 miles, the load has gained 38,000 pounds. The scale says 78,000. That is impossible. Nothing gains weight like that. Nothing except... You cannot finish the thought because finishing it means accepting something your rational mind refuses to believe. Something in that trailer is growing, multiplying, becoming more of itself with every mile you drive. The wet sounds are constant now, and they are not alone anymore. You hear other noises, scraping, shifting, the sound of organic matter pressing against metal. The trailer walls are creaking, flexing outward under pressure from inside. Whatever is back there is running out of room. I need to stop. I need to open the trailer and see what I am hauling. I do not care about the bonus anymore. This is not worth it. But even as you say it, you know you cannot stop. Not here. Not in this wilderness where the trees press close and the darkness is absolute. You have to make it to Sisters. You have to get somewhere. With people and help and protection. Mile marker 35 comes and goes, and your speed has dropped to 20 miles per hour. The truck cannot handle the weight anymore. The engine is overheating. The brakes are smoking. The suspension is bottomed out, metal scraping on metal with every bump and dip in the road. And the sounds from the trailer are getting worse, louder, more aggressive. You smell it then. Something putrid and organic seeping through the seal of the trailer, making its way into your cab. It is the smell of decay and growth happening simultaneously, death and life in the same breath. You gag and roll down your window, gulping cold mountain air. But the smell follows you. The smell is in the cab now. I can taste it. Whatever is back there, it is not cargo. It is alive. It is growing. It wants out. Your voice breaks on the last word, terror overwhelming the need to stay calm. The trailer shudders violently, and you feel something slam against the interior walls. Then again, a rhythmic pounding that makes the whole rig sway. Whatever is inside knows you are out here. It knows there is a barrier between you and it, and it is testing that barrier. Mile marker 40, 10 miles to Sisters. Your truck is down to 15 miles per hour now, barely crawling up the mountain grades. The needle on your weight gauge has gone past the red line. The frame is groaning. The axles are bending. This rig was not built for this. Nothing was built for this. The pounding gets harder. You hear metal tearing. One of the trailer panels buckles outward, the aluminum skin rupturing from internal pressure. Through your mirror, you see something pale and wet pressing through the tear. Something that glistens in your taillights. It pulses and writhes and then retreats back inside. The trailer is rupturing. I can see it. I can see something inside. It is not human. It is not anything. It is just mass. Just growing, multiplying organic mass that keeps becoming more. You are crying now. Tears streaming down your face, hands locked on the wheel, because letting go means accepting defeat, and you are so close. Sisters is so close. Mile marker 45. 5 miles. Your truck is down to 10 miles per hour. The trailer is disintegrating behind you, seams splitting, panels buckling. The wet mass inside is visible now through multiple ruptures, pale and veined and pulsing with obscene vitality. It has filled the entire trailer, and it is still growing. The frame breaks at mile marker 47. You feel it snap, feel the trailer collapse and drag, feel the rig jackknife as physics finally overcomes structure. You are sliding now, brakes locked, tires screaming, the trailer cartwheeling behind you in slow motion. The truck comes to rest on its side, and you are hanging in your harness, suspended above the passenger side, your head spinning and your vision blurred. You can hear the trailer behind you, the metal groaning and splitting. You can hear the wet mass inside expanding, freed from constraint, growing exponentially now that the container has failed. You fumble with your harness release, your fingers clumsy with panic and shock. The wet sounds are everywhere now, surrounding you. You look back through your sleeper and see it pressing against your rear window. The mass, pale and translucent and filled with dark veins that pulse like arteries. It is trying to reach you through the glass. The window cracks, then spider webs, then shatters, and the mass pours through like liquid given substance, flowing into your cab, filling every space. And you are screaming, but there is nowhere to go because you are still trapped in your harness hanging above the ground. Help me. Someone help me. It is in the cab. It is touching me. It is so cold. It is so wet. I can feel it on my skin. I can feel it. The recording cuts off with a sound that might be a scream or might be something else. Something wet and organic and final. They find the truck 3 days later. The trailer is split open like a cocoon, its contents gone or evaporated or never there at all. The cab is empty. The harness is still fastened, still hanging in place, but no body occupies it. The Bluetooth headset is found on the floor, still recording 48 hours of silence after that final transmission. The warehouse at Santiam Junction has no record of a sealed load going to Sisters that night. No dispatcher assigned that route. No paperwork exists beyond what was found in the truck. And when forensics examines it, the writing fades while they watch, ink dissolving into blank paper as if it had never been there. Highway 20 is quiet now. But sometimes, late at night, other drivers report their loads feeling heavier than they should. Their trailers sitting lower on the axles. Their trucks struggling against weight that grows with every mile, pulling them towards some unknown destination where physics no longer applies, and organic matter follows rules that have nothing to do with the world we know. He had been driving Highway 140 through eastern Oregon's high desert for 12 hours when the fuel gauge dropped below a quarter tank. The landscape around him was nothing but sagebrush and volcanic rock stretching to distant mountains. The kind of emptiness that made you feel like the last person on Earth. The nearest town was 60 miles back, and according to his GPS, the next one was 90 miles ahead. He needed fuel, and he needed it soon. That was when he saw the lights. Off to the right, maybe half a mile from the highway, a glow in the darkness that could only mean civilization. As he got closer, he saw the sign. Desert Star Truck Stop. Fuel, food, lodging. The lettering was vintage, the kind of neon script they stopped using in the 80s. But it was lit up and welcoming and exactly what he needed. He took the exit ramp, which was unmarked on his GPS, and followed a paved road toward the lights. The truck stop materialized out of the darkness like something from a postcard. A classic building with big windows and chrome trim. Half a dozen trucks parked in neat rows. Fuel pumps that looked old but functional. Everything was clean and well-maintained, glowing under halogen lights that pushed back the desert night. He pulled up to a pump and shut off his engine. The silence that followed felt wrong somehow. Too complete. He could not hear the other trucks idling. Could not hear generators or refrigeration units or any of the background noise that always filled truck stops. But the lights were on, and he could see people moving inside the building. So he grabbed his wallet and stepped out of his cab. The air smelled like diesel and coffee and French fries, all the normal truck stop smells. But underneath, there was something else. Something faint and chemical that he could not quite identify. He walked to the pump and tried to activate it with his card. The reader did not respond. No lights, no display, just dead plastic and metal. He looked toward the building and saw a man standing in the doorway, waving him in. The man wore a uniform shirt with a patch that said, Desert Star, and a name tag he could not read from this distance. The man smiled and gestured for him to come inside to pay. Standard procedure for old-fashioned places. Nothing unusual about that. The door chimed when he pushed it open, and the warmth inside was immediate and overwhelming. The building was heated to an uncomfortable degree, and he could see other truckers sitting at tables in a small diner area, eating food that steamed in the fluorescent lights. A woman stood behind a register, middle-aged with her hair in a style he had not seen in decades. She smiled at him with teeth that were too white and too perfect. "Welcome to Desert Star," she said, her voice bright and pleasant. "You need fuel?" "Pump 6, he said, pulling out his credit card. "Fill it up." She looked at the credit card like she had never seen one before. "We only take cash, honey. There is an ATM in the back if you need it." He glanced at the diner area again. The truckers were eating, but none of them were talking. They were just mechanically lifting forks to mouths, chewing, swallowing, reaching for water glasses. Their movements were synchronized in a way that human behavior should never be. All of them raised their forks at the same time. All of them chewed the same number of times. All of them swallowed in unison. "I think I will just head to the next town," he said, backing toward the door. "You should stay," the woman said. And her smile did not change, but her voice dropped an octave. "Everyone stays once they find us. It is easier that way." He turned and pushed through the door, moving fast now, heading back to his truck. Behind him, he could hear the door open again and footsteps following. Multiple footsteps. The truckers from the diner were coming out, moving together, still synchronized. He reached his cab and climbed in, locking the door. When he turned the key, nothing happened. The engine would not turn over. The electrical system was completely dead. He tried again and again, panic rising in his chest, but the truck would not start. The truckers surrounded his cab, pressing their faces against his windows. They were not threatening. They were just watching with empty expressions, their eyes reflecting the halogen lights in ways that made them look like mirrors instead of organic tissue. The woman from the register was there too, still smiling, tapping on his driver's side window with one perfectly manicured fingernail. "You cannot leave," she said, her voice muffled by the glass but still perfectly clear. "No one leaves Desert Star. Not since the fire, not since we all died here together. We have been waiting for someone new. Someone who can see us. Someone who can stay with us forever." He looked at his phone. No signal. The clock on the screen read 2:47 a.m. He looked at his truck's dashboard clock and it read 2:47 a.m. But when he looked back at his phone, it now read 2:52 a.m. 5 minutes had passed in seconds. Time was wrong here, moving at different speeds depending on where he looked. The woman was opening his door now, somehow, even though it was locked. The lock mechanism was turning by itself, clicking open, and the door was swinging wide. She reached in with that same pleasant smile and took his hand in hers. Her skin was cold and dry like paper. "Come inside," she said. "Have some coffee, have some food. Rest for a while. You look tired. All our drivers look tired when they first arrive. But after they rest, after they eat, they feel so much better. They never want to leave." He pulled his hand away and threw himself across the cab, scrambling out the passenger door. He hit the pavement running, heading away from the truck stop, away from the lights, into the darkness of the desert. Behind him, he could hear engines starting. All the parked trucks coming to life simultaneously. Headlights swept across the landscape as they began to move, forming a perimeter, cutting off his escape routes. He ran anyway, his boots crunching on volcanic gravel, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The desert was pitch black beyond the truck stop lights, and he could not see where he was going. But anywhere was better than back there with those synchronized people and that smiling woman and the time that flowed wrong. Something caught his foot, and he went down hard, hands scraping on rough ground. He rolled onto his back and saw the trucks had formed a complete circle around him, their headlights all pointed inward, creating a pool of harsh white light with him at the center. The engines idled in perfect harmony, creating a sound like breathing. The truckers were getting out of their cabs now, walking toward him with that same synchronized movement. The woman from the register was there too somehow, even though she should have been back at the building. She knelt beside him and helped him sit up with gentle hands that felt like ice. 43 years ago, she said, still smiling. There was a fire. Someone set it deliberately while we were all sleeping. 16 people died. Truckers, staff, a family passing through. We burned alive in this building, but we did not leave. We could not leave. This place kept us, trapped us, made us part of itself. She touched his face with her cold fingers, and where she touched, his skin went numb. Time works differently for us now. Inside the truck stop as hours pass in minutes. We experience decades in what feels like days. But we need anchors. We need people who can see us, who can interact with us, who can make us feel real again. You are the first one in 7 years who could see us. The first one whose truck pulled off the highway when we called. The first one who could pass through our door. He tried to speak but found his throat was too dry. She lifted a cup to his lips and he tasted coffee, bitter and cold, tasting of ash and chemicals. You will stay with us, she said. And it was not a question. You will park your truck with the others. You will sit in our diner and eat our food. You will live through years while the outside world experiences minutes. And when the next driver finally sees our lights and pulls in, you will be here to welcome them. You will smile and wave them inside. You will help them understand that they cannot leave, that no one ever leaves Desert Star. The other truckers were helping him to his feet now, supporting him between them, walking him back toward the lights. His legs were moving, but he was not controlling them. His body was going where they directed, following their synchronized steps. He could feel himself slipping away, his will eroding with each step closer to the building. They sat him at a table in the diner. The woman brought him a plate of food that steamed in the cold air. The other truckers took their seats around him, all lifting their forks in unison. He found his own hand reaching for utensils without his conscious decision. The synchronization was spreading to him, making him part of the pattern. He looked at a clock on the wall. It read 3:15 a.m., but his watch said 2:53 a.m. Only 6 minutes had passed outside while he had been running and caught and brought back. Inside this place, he had experienced 20 minutes. The differential would only get worse. Soon, an hour inside would be a minute outside. Soon a day inside would be an hour outside. Soon years would pass, while the world beyond these walls barely noticed. The woman sat across from him, still smiling. Eat, she said. You will need your strength. We have so much time to spend together. Decades, centuries, forever. He lifted the fork to his mouth and chewed food that tasted like ashes and old dreams. Around him, the other truckers chewed in perfect synchronization. He found his own jaw matching their rhythm. Chew, 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 swallow, all together. All trapped together in this pocket of broken time where the dead pretended to be alive, and the living slowly forgot what it meant to be human. The lights of Desert Star burned in the darkness. The signs still welcomed travelers. The pumps still promised fuel. And somewhere out on Highway 140, another truck was approaching, its driver tired and running low on gas. Looking for salvation in the desert night. Looking for lights that should not be there. looking for a place that died 43 years ago, but never learned how to stay dead. She had always considered herself a rational person. Science degree, skeptical mind. The kind of person who could explain away ghost stories and UFO sightings with logic and statistics. But Highway 230 through the Crater Lake region on a moonless November night tested every rational belief she had ever held. And by the time it was over, she would be sitting in a psychiatric evaluation room trying to convince a doctor that what she saw was real. The figure appeared in her headlights at 3:47 a.m., standing on the shoulder about 200 yards ahead. A person, or what looked like a person, waving one arm in the universal gesture for help. She slowed down instinctively, her hand already reaching for her phone to call for assistance. Because that was what you did when you saw someone stranded on a remote highway in the middle of the night. You helped. But as her headlights got closer, something made her foot hesitate over the brake pedal. The figure was tall, maybe 6.5 feet, wearing what appeared to be normal clothes. Jeans, a jacket. But the proportions were slightly off in a way her brain registered before her conscious mind could articulate it. The arms were too long. The legs seemed to have an extra segment between knee and hip. The head sat at an angle that was almost right, but not quite, tilted forward just a few degrees more than human anatomy should allow. She told herself it was the distance creating an optical illusion. She told herself the darkness and her exhaustion were making her see things that were not there. But her truck kept slowing, dropping from 50 to 40 to 30 miles per hour, and the figure remained in her headlights, waving that too long arm in steady, mechanical repetition. When she was about 50 feet away, the figure stopped waving and turned to face her directly. That was when she saw the face, and that was when every rational explanation she had been constructing collapsed into dust. The face was human-shaped. It had eyes and a nose and a mouth in approximately the correct positions. But it was all wrong. The eyes were too large and too dark, like someone had carved holes into a mask, and the darkness behind them went on forever. The nose was slightly asymmetrical, one nostril higher than the other. The mouth was too wide, stretching almost to where ears should be, and it was curved into a smile that showed too many teeth arranged in rows that went back farther than any human mouth could accommodate. She accelerated hard, her rational mind temporarily offline, replaced by pure instinct screaming at her to get away. The truck surged forward, and she kept her eyes locked on the road ahead, refusing to look in her mirrors, refusing to see if the thing was still there, or if it was following, or if it had ever been real at all. But her mirrors caught the image anyway, and what she saw made her whimper. The figure was running behind her truck. Not running like a human runs, with alternating legs and pumping arms and a bobbing head. Running like an insect might run if it was pretending to be human, with legs that bent at too many joints and arms that swung in perfect synchronization with each other rather than in opposition. It was fast, impossibly fast, keeping pace with her truck even as her speedometer climbed past 60, past 70, past 80. The road through this section of Highway 230 was winding and treacherous, cutting through dense forest with sharp curves every quarter mile. She took them at speeds that made her trailer sway dangerously, the tires screaming on cold asphalt. But the figure stayed with her. Sometimes it was directly behind, visible in her rear camera. Sometimes it disappeared from view, only to reappear in her side mirror, running alongside her truck, that terrible face turned toward her, that too wide smile never changing. She tried her phone. No signal. She tried the CB radio. Static. She tried the emergency SOS button built into her truck's navigation system. The screen flickered and went dark. She was alone with this thing on a road that seemed to stretch on forever, with no help coming and no way to call for it. The figure suddenly appeared directly in front of her truck, standing in the middle of the road, and she had no time to react before she hit it. The impact was solid and heavy, the kind that should have shattered bones and crushed flesh. Her truck shuddered, and she felt the bump as her front wheels and then her rear trailer wheels rolled over something. She looked in her mirror, expecting to see a body lying broken on the pavement behind her. But the figure was standing up. No, not standing up. It had never fallen down. It was just there, upright, in the exact center of the road, watching her taillights recede. And then it started running again. That horrible insect-like gait, arms swinging together, legs bending at impossible angles, closing the distance with mechanical precision. She pushed the truck harder, the engine screaming in protest, the speedometer needle buried past 90. The curves were coming too fast now, her trailer fishtailing on each one, threatening to jackknife and send her spinning off the road. But slowing down meant letting it catch her. And some primal part of her brain knew with absolute certainty that being caught by that thing would be worse than any crash. It caught up to her on a straightaway, appearing suddenly in her passenger side window, running alongside her door at 95 miles per hour, its face pressed close to the glass. She could see it in detail now, could see that what she had thought was skin was actually something else. Something smooth and waxy like latex stretched over a frame. She could see that the eyes were not eyes at all, but empty sockets filled with darkness that somehow still managed to convey the sense of looking, of seeing, of targeting. The thing raised one hand and pressed it against her window. The fingers were too long, with too many joints, each segment bending in ways that fingers should not bend. It tapped on the glass with a sound like bones clicking together, and the smile widened even further, splitting its face nearly in half. She swerved hard to the right, trying to force it off the road, but it simply moved with her, maintaining its position beside her door. She swerved left and it followed. It was not running on the road anymore, she realized. It was running on air, its feet making contact with nothing, suspended somehow by forces she could not begin to understand. Then it spoke. She could not hear the words through the glass and the roar of the engine, but she could see its mouth moving, see the teeth clicking together as it formed sounds that approximated human speech. She could read its lips, or what passed for lips on that terrible face, and the words it was saying made her stomach clench with visceral dread. "Let me in, let me in, let me in." Over and over, mechanical and precise, while its hand continued to tap against her window and its empty eyes continued to stare, and its body continued to run alongside her at speeds that defied every law of physics and biology she had ever learned. The window began to crack, not from the tapping, which had been gentle, almost polite. It cracked from the inside out, as if the mere presence of the thing was enough to corrupt matter itself, to make glass forget how to be solid, to make reality bend and break around whatever fundamental wrongness this creature embodied. She screamed and covered her face with one arm, still holding the wheel with the other, waiting for the glass to shatter and those two long fingers to reach through and grab her. But the glass held, crazed with cracks, but not breaking. And when she looked again, the figure was gone. She did not slow down for another 20 miles, did not believe in safety until she saw the lights of a small town ahead, and pulled into a gas station where real people stood under real lights doing real human things. She sat in her cab shaking for 30 minutes before she could even open the door. When she finally got out to inspect her truck, she found the damage. Her front bumper was crumpled. Her grille was shattered, There was blood on her headlights and something that looked like hair caught in the broken plastic. Physical evidence that she had hit something, that it had been real. But there was something else. On her passenger window, in the exact spot where the thing had pressed its hand, there were marks. Fingerprints, if you could call them that. But they were wrong. Too many whorls, too many ridges, patterns that did not match any human hand or any known animal. Patterns that seemed to shift and change when you looked at them too long, creating optical illusions that made your eyes water and your head ache. She tried to tell the police. She tried to explain what had happened. They were kind, but skeptical, attributing her story to fatigue and stress and the psychological effects of hitting what was probably a deer or large dog. They took photos of the damage. They collected samples of the blood and hair. They documented the strange marks on her window. And then they sent her home with a recommendation to see a counselor. The psychiatric evaluation came 3 weeks later, after she stopped sleeping, after she started seeing things that looked like people but moved wrong, after she was found in a parking lot at 4 a.m., checking every parked car for something with 2 long arms and empty eyes. The doctor was patient and professional, recording her story, nodding in the right places, prescribing medication that would help with the hallucinations and paranoia. But she knew what she had seen. She knew it had been real. And she knew, with the certainty that comes from looking into those empty eyes, that it was still out there. Still walking on roads that cut through darkness. Still waiting for another truck to come along. Still wearing its approximation of human form like a costume it did not quite understand how to operate. The lab results on the blood and hair came back inconclusive. Not deer, not dog, not any species in their database. The fingerprints on her window were filed away as unexplained anomalies. The case was closed. The road remained open. And somewhere on Highway 230, near Crater Lake, on moonless nights when the forest presses close and the curves come sharp and fast, something stands on the shoulder, waving one arm in a gesture that almost looks like a plea for help. Something that waits for the next driver who will slow down and look closely enough to see that the proportions are wrong, that the face is a mask, that the smile goes too wide and the eyes go too deep, and the body moves in ways that human bodies were never meant to move. Something that runs on air and speaks in approximations of language and wants desperately to be let in. She never drives at night anymore. She never takes routes that go through isolated areas. And she never, ever stops for figures standing on dark shoulders waving for help, because she knows now that some things wear the shape of humanity like a disguise, and underneath that disguise is something so fundamentally other that looking at it too long can break your mind. He had 3 weeks before the cancer treatment started, 3 weeks before the surgeries and chemotherapy and radiation that might save his life or might just prolong his dying. His doctor had told him to get his affairs in order, to spend time with family, to prepare for what was coming. Instead, he took one last long-haul run through the mountains, one final drive through the wilderness before his body became a battleground for forces beyond his control. If he was going to lose autonomy over his own flesh, he wanted one last taste of freedom on the open road. The GPS showed a shortcut, an unnamed Forest Service road that connected to Highway 230 southeast of Crater Lake, cutting 40 miles off his route. It was marked as unpaved but passable, and he had driven worse roads in his 30 years behind the wheel. The main highway would get him there eventually, but this route would get him there with time to spare, time to sit and think and come to terms with mortality in the way that only solitude and wilderness could provide. The turnoff appeared exactly where the GPS indicated, a narrow road disappearing into dense pine forest. No signs, no markers, just packed dirt and gravel that looked solid enough for his rig. He made the turn and committed, knowing that backing a full trailer out would be nearly impossible if the road deteriorated. But the surface held firm beneath his wheels, and he settled into the gentle rhythm of slow, careful driving through the trees. The forest around him was old growth, the kind of primeval woodland that predated human settlement by centuries. Massive Douglas firs rose on both sides like cathedral pillars, their branches interlocking overhead to create a canopy so dense that his headlights were necessary even in late afternoon. The air smelled of pine sap and moss and decomposition, the eternal cycle of growth and decay that the forest had been performing since long before he was born and would continue long after he was gone. He had been driving for 20 minutes when he noticed the light was wrong, not fading the way afternoon light should fade into evening, but simply diminishing, as if something was absorbing it. The shadows between the trees were not growing darker, but becoming absolute. Patches of blackness so complete that his headlights seemed to stop at their edges rather than penetrating them. The road continued straight ahead, solid and real beneath his tires. His GPS still showed the route, the blue line on the screen indicating he was exactly where he should be, following the path that would eventually reconnect with Highway 230. But something felt wrong. The forest felt wrong. The light felt wrong. The air itself felt wrong, growing thinner somehow, harder to breathe, as if the oxygen content was dropping with every mile he traveled. He should have turned back. But turning back would mean giving up, admitting defeat, acknowledging that his body and his world were both failing him in ways he could not control. So he kept driving, kept pushing forward into the dimming light, telling himself that the discomfort was just his imagination, just the stress of his diagnosis manifesting as irrational fear. The trees began to look strange, not diseased or dying, but incomplete somehow, as if they were sketches rather than solid objects, outlines that suggested treeness without fully committing to being trees. Their trunks lacked texture when he looked closely. Their branches had no individual needles, just shapes that implied the presence of foliage. They were less real with every passing moment, fading from three-dimensional objects into two-dimensional facades. His dashboard instruments started behaving erratically. The speedometer needle drifted between speeds without corresponding to his actual velocity. The fuel gauge climbed and fell randomly. The temperature readings made no sense, showing external temperatures that varied by 50 degrees from 1 second to the next. Only the GPS remained stable, still showing his truck moving along that thin gray line through the forest. The road ahead was becoming less defined. The edges were blurring, the gravel and dirt transitioning into something that was almost road-like, but not quite solid. His tires still found purchase, still moved him forward, but he could feel the surface becoming insubstantial beneath him, as if he was driving on the memory of a road rather than the road itself. He looked in his mirrors and saw that the road behind him was gone, not overgrown or washed away, but simply absent. Where his trailer had just passed, there was nothing. No road, no forest. Just emptiness that his mind could not process, could not categorize, could not name. It was not darkness or void or space. It was the absence of everything. The concept of nothing made manifest. Panic tried to take hold, but he pushed it down with the same discipline he had used to face every crisis in his life. The convoy ambush in Fallujah, the divorce, the diagnosis. Fear was natural, but it was not useful. What was useful was keeping his hands steady on the wheel and his eyes on what remained of the road ahead, and his mind focused on the problem of how to survive the next 5 minutes. But the road was ending. He could see it now, perhaps a quarter mile ahead. not a dead end or washout or any kind of normal termination. The road simply stopped existing. It continued forward until it did not, transitioning from barely real to completely absent. And beyond that transition, there was nothing at all. He pressed the brake, but his truck did not slow. The pedal had no resistance, connecting to nothing, controlling nothing. He tried downshifting, but the transmission would not respond. He tried the emergency brake, but it was already incorporeal, a lever that moved through empty space without engaging any mechanism. The truck rolled forward at steady speed toward the place where reality ended. His GPS flickered and died. His dashboard lights went dark. His headlights faded to nothing. But he could still see somehow, could still perceive the thinning road and the fading forest and the nothingness that waited ahead. Some sense beyond vision was showing him what his eyes could no longer register. He thought about his daughter, who he had not called as much as he should have. He thought about his ex-wife, who had deserved better than his long absences. He thought about the cancer growing in his body, the cells that had forgotten how to be normal cells and had become something else, something wrong, something that was consuming him from the inside. He thought about how strange it was that he would die here instead of on some hospital bed, surrounded by machines and morphine. The front wheels of his truck crossed the threshold where the road stopped existing. He felt the moment of transition, felt the absence of ground beneath him, felt the truck beginning to fall through nothing into nothing. But falling required gravity and space and time, and this place had none of those things. So the truck did not fall. It simply stopped being. The cabin dissolved around him, metal and plastic becoming transparent and then becoming nothing. His seat became air. His steering wheel became memory. His body began to follow, starting with his extremities, his hands and feet fading first, losing solidity, losing definition, losing existence. But his mind remained. His consciousness persisted even as his physical form was erased. He could think without a brain. He could see without eyes. He could perceive the vast emptiness that surrounded him, the absolute nothing that existed beyond the edge of reality where roads ran out and creation stopped, and the universe simply gave up on the effort of being. In that moment of dissolution, he understood something fundamental about existence. Reality was not solid. It was not permanent. It was a thin film stretched over infinite nothing. And sometimes that film wore thin, developed holes, created spaces where the nothing could leak through. This road had found one of those holes. Or perhaps the road itself was the hole, a wound in existence that had never properly healed. He existed in that state for what might have been seconds or centuries. Time had no meaning here. Neither did distance or matter or any of the constants that defined normal existence. There was only consciousness floating in absolute emptiness, aware of itself, aware of the nothing, aware that this was what lay beneath everything, what waited for everything, what everything would eventually become. And then, without warning or explanation, he was back. Sitting in his truck. On Highway 230, the actual highway, paved and marked and utterly normal. His GPS showed him exactly where he should be if he had never taken that Forest Service road at all. His dashboard clock indicated that no time had passed. His odometer showed he had traveled no distance. The shortcut had not happened, or it had happened outside of time and space and normal causality. He pulled over and sat there shaking, his hands gripping the wheel so hard his knuckles were white. He checked his phone. Normal service, normal time. He checked his paperwork. Everything was in order. He checked himself in his mirror. Same face, same eyes, same body that would betray him in 3 weeks when the treatment started. But something was different. Some fundamental understanding had changed. He had seen the nothing that waited beneath everything, and that vision had altered his relationship with fear. The cancer could kill him. The treatment could fail. He could die slowly and painfully over months or years. But all of that was happening in the thin film of existence, the temporary pattern of matter and energy that pretended to be permanent but was not. Beneath it all was the nothing he had touched. And the nothing was not terrifying. It was simply inevitable. It was where everything came from and where everything returned. It was not death, because death implied an ending, and the nothing had no concept of endings or beginnings. It just was. He started his truck and pulled back onto the highway and drove the rest of his route in contemplative silence. 3 weeks later, he began his cancer treatment. The surgeries and chemotherapy and radiation were exactly as difficult as his doctors had warned. But he faced them without fear, because he had already traveled to the place where roads end and reality fails and existence becomes optional. Compared to that, mere physical suffering seemed almost trivial. He never told anyone about the road that led nowhere. There were no words adequate to describe it, no framework in normal human experience that could accommodate the truth of what he had seen. But sometimes, late at night, he would look at maps of Oregon and trace the routes through the wilderness southeast of Crater Lake, searching for that unnamed Forest Service road. It never appeared on any map. The GPS never showed it again. But he knew it was out there, waiting, leading travelers to the edge of everything and showing them what lies beyond. These are the stories that came from Oregon's darkest highways. 11 accounts from drivers who saw what most people never see, who traveled roads that exist in the spaces between reality and whatever lies beneath it. 7 of these truckers were never found. Their rigs were discovered abandoned, engines still running, but the drivers had vanished into whatever waited for them out there in the darkness. If you have experienced something unexplainable on the backroads at night, you are not alone. These stories remind us that the world is stranger and more terrifying than we allow ourselves to believe in daylight. Subscribe to Verified Fears for more true accounts from the edges of reality. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we bring you the stories that others are too afraid to tell. And remember, some roads are better left untraveled. Some shortcuts lead places you can never return from. And some things that happen in the darkness should stay in the darkness. But if you have a story to share, if something found you on a lonely highway and changed you forever, we want to hear it. Contact us at verifiedfearsugmail.com. Because these stories need to be told. These experiences need to be shared. And someone out there needs to know they are not crazy for seeing what they saw. Stay safe out there. And whatever you do, think twice before taking that shortcut through the mountains at night.